think now you could argue is a really good time to buy Nissan if you have confidence that they will survive. Nissan's a little bit of a riskier bet than Stellantis, but I still just don't see the Japanese government letting Nissan go out of business. Just like the US government supported General Motors and Chrysler with loans and other support, I'm pretty confident Japan Inc. is not going to let Nissan go away.
Today, I'm joined once again by Alan Haig, president of Haig Partners, a leading dealership buy-sell advisory firm. We dive into everything shaping the automotive market and the state of dealership M&A in 2025. From the biggest opportunities for new franchise dealers to Nissan and their future, Alan gives us the ultimate retail breakdown that you don't want to miss. A big thank you to our sponsors for making today's episode possible: Uber for Business, Podium, and my very own CDG Recruiting. And now let's get into the show. Alan Haig back on the CDG podcast. Alan, what is going on?
There's a lot going on, Yossi. Sometimes my head spins. We have everything from tariffs to huge transactions to new entrants in the new car business. So my conversation with dealers have been a little bit on the, we don't know what's going to come next, but we hope it's better than yesterday. That's how people, I think, are feeling right now.
I can tell you that the most challenging part about preparing for this episode was figuring out what I want to put on the docket. So that's we'll keep it exciting. There's definitely several different topics. We'll talk about M&A and what's been happening with mergers, acquisitions in auto retail. We've seen some interesting things recently. We'll talk about some mega deals that happen. We'll talk about potential macro tariffs, the franchise landscape at large. We'll talk about that as well. So there's no shortage. Before we even get started, I know we have our lots of loyal listeners that tune into this episode because they really love your insights on the industry. You bring a very well-rounded perspective. But can you, for the new listeners on the pod, can you just give us a quick intro of yourself and your background and what you do?
Sure. So I started in investment banking, working in New York, and got my MBA, and I wanted to work in, quote, a real company. So I joined one of the Wayne Huizinga family of companies. He was world-class entrepreneur and started Waste Management, rolled up Blockbuster, and then he started AutoNation, which started as a used car superstore concept. He asked me to come and write a business plan for a new car company, which I wrote my little thesis of how AutoNation could consolidate this industry through economies of scale, best practices, national brands, et cetera, and would perform better than the mom and pop retailers that dominated the industry at that time. And then we went out and started acquiring dealerships. We had kind of unlimited capital, but then we met the unlimited force of the entrepreneurs that are out there and realized it's, just being big doesn't make you better. And so I left AutoNation, did some other things in investment banking, came back to AutoNation, but spent 2 stints of my career there. But since 2008, I've been representing owners of auto dealerships who have decided to exit for various reasons, either getting out of the business altogether or they want to divest an underperforming store in an outlying market. So we've got a team, I guess there are 14 of us here at Haig Partners. Most of our work is sell-side M&A. We do a little bit of buy-side work M&A. In fact, we have a client, Yossi, that might be fun to talk about later. That's a Kazakhstani automotive-related company that wants to come and invest in U.S. auto dealerships. So
I have a feeling like I know who you're talking about. Is it? Yeah, I mean, I've been seeing a lot of Kazakhstan. It's
there are actually 2 parties I learned coming from that part of the world. Yeah, both very successful entrepreneurs in Kazakhstan that want to bring some capital to the U.S. to invest and hopefully add some value, but also learn about our world here.
Well, it might be the right time as the government's starting to incentivize U.S. investment. They may be timing it pretty well.
Yes, and dealership prices have moderated a little bit, and hopefully the supply was going to be coming back. So I think maybe there was a perspective that this is a wise time to invest. We may be having some bumps along the way here, but I think certainly auto retail has proven to be an excellent long-term investor for many, many people, and we certainly hope that'll continue.
So Alan, your firm Haig Partners publishes a quarterly report called the Haig Report, which I love reading these reports. We always write about them because they always contain just such great, rich, and deep insights about just the current state of automotive retail. You talk about buy-sell trends and many other things. You've now released by the airing of this episode, you've released your latest report. Can you start us off by just telling us what stood out in this report? What's changing, right? Give us a bit of an overview of the state of automotive M&A.
Sure. So this will be our 4th quarter report. So we'll be reporting on all the data that's been published by the publicly traded companies that really have the best, most pure data that's available to us. And there were some very positive outcomes from what we found, in that primarily that the average gross profit per new unit appears to have stayed stabilized on average across all franchises. That is what's been seeing the decline since we peaked, in probably 2022 with very high front-end gross profits, many vehicles being sold over MSRP for the first time that I can really remember. But they were declining as supply came back and as these units increased in value, discounting was becoming necessary for retailers to sell them. So it appears that decline has leveled off on average. Now, if you are a Ford dealer, it's leveled off at a number that's kind of uncomfortable. If you're at a Toyota dealer, it's leveled off at a number that you'd love to sustain for years and years. So there is big variation within the franchises, but across the industry overall, we've seen a leveling off of the decline of new vehicle volume, and that drives, or new vehicle profits, and that drives a lot of the profitability throughout the enterprise. So we're seeing a little bit lower gross profits on used cars, a little bit higher on F&I profits per vehicle retailed, better 5% increase in fixed operations compared to 2023. So when you mix it all together, we have gross or net profit per store on average of $4 million for the public companies. That's leveled off now at twice the level of the profits per store that we had in 2019 before the pandemic created such a disruption for all of us. So some of that is because of inflation. Just the value of the goods we sell now is higher than it used to be, so we should be making more money off selling them. But some of it is a higher floor in things like fixed operations, where dealers have never made more money in their fixed ops than they have right now. And we're hearing labor rates. I talked to one friend of mine yesterday that has a Porsche store in the northeast part of the world or the country. His labor rates are approaching $400 an hour. Last year at this time, I was talking about some clients we had in South Florida.
It's unbelievable.
That were around $300 an hour. Now, Porsche's an extreme, probably a Ford store in the Northeast is closer to 200, but nevertheless, it shows the growth in profitability of fixed operations, which is a great support to the ongoing profitability of these dealerships. So overall, the historical data, what we did in 2024 is very positive for dealers on average, but now we're seeing, in just the first couple of the months of the year, some significant buffeting that we're now experiencing, even as today we speak with Yossi, where the stock prices for the publicly traded retailers are declining significantly just from where they were yesterday because of all these announcements of tariffs.
Mm-hmm. Tell me, I want to take one quick step back. You spoke about the average profits, new car profits, more or less stabilizing, but we know that there's very meaningful variation between brands. I recently had Matt Bowers, who's a phenomenal dealer from the South. He was on the podcast, and I asked him a question. I said, Matt, I think I asked him, how do you find dealerships to acquire, or what do you like, or there's something along those lines. And Matt said something interesting, and I actually hadn't heard this before. He said, Yossi, of course, there's brand mix and all these other things, but at the end of the day, he said, I want to know who's the competition in my market, right? Am I buying a Toyota store where I'm competing against the best operators, or am I buying in a market where I'm the only one there, or maybe there's a very subpar operator, et cetera, et cetera. So I think my question to you is, in light of what you just mentioned, right, which is that there are franchises out there right now that are doing very well on the new car side, or profits are, and there are others where profits have compressed, and it's hurting really bad. Do you see dealers looking more to diversify their brand mix nowadays, or are people kind of more specifically focused on specific markets? Like, how is the market shifting amongst dealers and what they're looking for in new acquisitions?
Before the pandemic, we typically saw people wanting to expand in their core markets, where they already knew the customers, they had existing management talent that they could move around, they had lenders that would support their growth in that market, they had a website, they could drive traffic to that website, the customer could go to any place in town that they own. That was, to me, a very viable and reliable strategy. During the pandemic, we saw some people bend their rules a little bit, and their acquisition strategies got a little bit more flexible. Because they had so much capital, because they wanted to grow, they might be willing to consider a Kia store a plane flight away because they wanted to grow and there's nothing available in their core market, or a platform of stores out of town. And now that conditions have gotten a little bit tougher, we are seeing some of those groups say, hey, I don't really have somebody good to operate that store. The GM quit, left me. It's becoming a little bit of an issue with the factories. They're not happy with me. I want to be able to continue to grow. So we are seeing more divestitures now than we have seen in quite some time, including the public companies. But I think many people who grew during the pandemic are realizing it's a little easier to operate something close to home than it is a plane flight away. So I think we're going to return to that strategy where people are growing regionally. I know Matt, he's an excellent operator. I would say another thing about Matt is that he's not seeking a top performing store. I believe his strategy is try to find underperforming stores. Because he's an excellent operator, he's able to buy something that's not doing well and insert his energy, his systems, maybe his people, and transform that business. And that's how he's creating value when he buys a store. The public companies might pursue a little bit different strategy where they're not really looking for underperforming stores. They want to find a well-performing store, but then use their scale to maybe save some costs, maybe plug that store into their network of dealerships in an area and help them all get stronger. So there are a lot of acquisition strategies that are viable. We've just seen them change a little bit before pandemic to during the before and then during and now after. So they are different ones that can work. We have some people that just want Honda and Toyota and they'll buy those stores anywhere in the country. We did several transactions last year with Victory Automotive Group, the Capo family, and they really love Honda and Toyota, do great with them, and I think Honda and Toyota like them in their network. We have other folks who won't pay the multiple that it's required to get a Honda or Toyota store. They don't see the return on investment. They'd rather buy a Ford dealership, a Chevrolet dealership, a Stellantis dealership, where the return on investment is higher, even if it's a little more challenging to operate those stores sometimes because it's more competitive in every market.
So tell me, let's talk more about the market. Based on what you're seeing, any surprises or anything you think dealers should be specifically preparing for in this year? I mean, I guess I should ask it differently. I mean, is there anything that's not going to be a surprise? But based on just the level of activity that you're seeing in the market right now and sentiment and the reasons dealers are choosing to sell right now, what are you seeing out there?
There are a number of reasons why people choose to sell. I would say the most common is age, that people get to the point where they want to retire, and it's not a simple business to operate a car dealership. You have a lot of constituencies, you have a lot of employees, you have big loans outstanding, and management is challenging. So that's always been the case. I would say during the pandemic, some people, the blue sky prices, more than doubled during the pandemic. So that allowed some people to pull forward their retirements where they said, well, I could sell now and make $100 million, or I could keep the stores for another 5 years. And maybe I'd make that 100, but maybe also the business could turn down. So a lot of people took the pandemic era of high blue sky values as an opportunity to exit the industry. Sitting today, we have what could be some potentially very good news for dealers in CARB states. I was on the phone yesterday with Joe Agresti, who is the chairman of this Automotive Advisory Board, to Senator Moreno, who has submitted a bill to give some relief on these requirements that are going to be hitting really all states, but in particular the California Air Resource Board states. And I think there are 14 states that have adopted the CARB requirements. And those CARB requirements are going to start to kick in 2026, next year, where I believe 35% of the new cars sold in each of those states had to be considered as a zero-emission vehicle. And so that level of sales is simply not possible by almost any manufacturer, including Toyota. And so there's been a lot of lobbying to try to adjust those requirements to make them more reasonable. And as I understand, this bill from Senator Moreno would eliminate the CARB requirements, would prohibit them, any state, from having their own. They had to be national, and they had to be set in conjunction with the EPA, the OEMs, the dealers, and a consulting business or consulting organization to the industry. So they would be set, so emissions would be getting cleaner, but at a pace that was actually realistic and achievable. So if that bill is passed, then it's going to mean very good things for values of dealerships located in those CARB states of California, for instance, because it was becoming a little bit of a for a buyer to acquire a dealership in California and not know if they were going to have a manufacturer that could supply them with vehicles that they could sell, kind of becomes a risky proposition. So if CARB goes away, demand for stores in states like California, New York, Massachusetts, etc., will be higher, and therefore the values will be higher. If CARB is really enforced, then it's going to be challenging for buyers buy-sells in those states because the buyer simply doesn't know how to project what the future is going to be. And I don't even know what lenders will do with respect to acquisitions.
That's a really, so that could have a big impact on just valuations because of the on just uncertainty.
100%. So we're optimistic that this bill or something like it will be passed. And it's wonderful to have a former auto dealer as a sitting U.S. senator who's young and vigorous and wants to make an improvement in the lives of not just the citizens, but also auto workers. As I understand this bill, one of the provisions is that it would allow the OEM OEMs to have a 200% tax credit for their auto workers and the folks who design the vehicles to increase production of vehicles inside the United States and make it more affordable to produce vehicles here. So it seems to have something for everybody, which is probably the mark of a good bill, so that you can get bipartisan support. Because this bill, as I understand, requires 60 votes in the Senate to pass. So hopefully the senators from Democratic states that have auto workers in their states will like this bill, because it'll be more production of vehicles in the United States and in their home states, and they'll support it. And then hopefully, people in other parts of the country will like it too. California, for instance, so they can have vehicles that the customers could actually afford to buy. Because right now, the cost of EVs is still a good bit higher than what an ICE engine is.
Talk to us a little bit more about deal activity by brand right now. And specifically, we're seeing lots of change happening right now. We went through a couple of years where Stellantis was sort of in the penalty box. Ford, maybe before that, right? If you started like 2020, 2021 as Ford, then it was sort of Stellantis. Now it seems to sort of be Nissan. Stellantis is sort of, getting out of there. They have better leadership, management, lowering the prices of their vehicles. Things seem to be looking much better. So, it's just these like cycles with the brands. What are you seeing right now in terms of brand values, the biggest changes, and specifically alongside these changes, what strategies from OEMs are impacting brand values?
Great question. I sometimes encourage my contacts in the OEM world to just why do you need to come up with your own strategy? Just copy Toyota. It just seems to work. What they do, their long-term approach to providing reliable, affordable transportation to their customers through a true partnership with their dealers. That we know works. Customers are happy, the retailers are happy. Retailers are happy to invest a lot in Toyota and Lexus, whether it's facilities, whether it's training, whether it's marketing, so that the customers have a good experience when they come. We've had some other OEM who've chosen paths where they seem to want to go around the dealer. And, we've been a little bit critical of Volkswagen for pursuing this approach with Scout, for instance, where you've designed this potentially magnificent product, but you're not going to offer it to your Volkswagen dealers. You're going to try to sell it in their markets directly and compete with the Atlases and Touaregs, et cetera, that those dealers are trying to sell the same customers. So, I think there have been some management changes or decisions. You mentioned Stellantis, it's a great example. It was about 2.5 years ago, we were representing the owners of some Stellantis dealerships in the Charlotte area. They were really high-performing stores. They'd made tons of money, and we were able to sell one of them for the highest price ever paid for a Stellantis dealership. And during that time, Stellantis, sales were coming down, but the profits were still decent for retailers. But they pursued a strategy of kind of abandoning some of their lower-priced models, like the Jeep Cherokee, that I think was 16% of their sales at the time, in favor of introducing these new models, Jeep Grand Wagoneer, for instance, that was going to be priced over $100,000. They wanted to move that brand upscale. Perhaps they felt like they would make more money as a company, as a manufacturer. So that was what they thought would make sense. But they moved so fast that their core customers didn't follow. The customer who was used to spending $35,000 or $40,000 to buy a new Wrangler, they come in and they're priced at $50,000 or $60,000. Even factoring inflation, that's a big jump. So we saw Stellantis increase their wholesale prices to dealers faster than any other manufacturer, and that backfired on them. Their sales dropped significantly. I think they lost a third of their market share, but the dealers kind of rebelled, and Dave Kelleher and the people at the Stellantis Dealer Advisory Board wrote that public letter to Carlos Tavares and the board at Stellantis, and the board reacted. And Mr. Tavares is no longer there. They've replaced him with new management, and already we're seeing some very positive outcomes in the Stellantis dealer network, and that the average transaction price is coming down much closer to what is the industry average, thanks to some incentives. And they're also talking about bringing back the Jeep Cherokee and other Ram products that are more affordable for customers, and the sales are picking up. So it really is another example where, a choice of OEMs that they think could be good for their shareholders, if they're not asking first what's good for their customers, it can backfire on everybody. So we're actually seeing, a lot of people have kind of given up on their Stellantis stores. We actually think it's a good time to buy a Stellantis business, because I think it's about as low as it's going to go, especially if there's CARB relief or, the EPA relief. Stellantis didn't have a lot of great options compared to Hyundai or Kia or Honda or Toyota with respect to hybrids. But if some of those standards get lessened for a little while, it'll give the Stellantis brands an opportunity to sell and compete on where their core customers are located today. So
this episode is brought to you by Uber for Business. Courtesy transportation is no longer a nice to have, it's a need to have. Last year, we ran a poll on X asking our followers how they prefer to get home from a dealership after dropping off a car for service or maintenance. 31% of respondents answered that they preferred an Uber ride. Using Central from Uber for Business, you can request an on-demand ride for your customers even if they don't have the Uber app. Coordinate one-way or round-trip Uber rides, monitor trips in real time, set spend caps, and generate reports in one dashboard. Uber for Business is an easy way to provide an experience customers love while reducing the costs associated with maintaining shuttles and limiting the liability of loaner vehicles. If you plan to attend the upcoming NADA Expo in New Orleans, stop by and meet the Uber for Business team at booth 6952. Again, that's booth 6952 to learn how they can help you drive customer loyalty one ride at a time. You can also visit t.uber.com/CDG Auto today to learn more, or visit the link in the show notes below.
I was gonna ask you. I mean, do you think you said it's a good time to buy a Stellantis store? Do you think it's maybe a little late to buy a Stellantis store, and there's other opportunities out there, or where are you at on that?
No, I think it's still a good time. I mean, the results are starting to turn, but the profits in 2024 for the average Stellantis store are way lower than they were in 22, or I don't think they're back to where they were in 2019 yet. So if you can buy a store today that's not where it was in 2019 in terms of profits,
Wow.
Best case Stellantis gets all the way back to where they were.
That's pretty crazy though. 2019, thinking of all the inflation we've had.
That's right. So I think there's a chance where you might be able to buy a Stellantis store and double the profits over the next few years, because Stellantis is going to come back to where their customers are instead of going to where they hope their customers will one day be. So if they can continue that and introduce some good products that are at favorable prices, then I think they do have a chance to recover quite a lot of the profits that the average store lost. They just need to get those customers back. And I don't think anything happened at the brand level where, there wasn't like there was a moment where, remember the Audi acceleration thing back in the 90s and people lost faith in the vehicle, or same thing happened with Hyundai with their engines were kind of seizing up.
I don't remember the Audi acceleration thing, but I'll pretend I do.
You're too young. Some of us on this podcast may remember.
There's a Toyota acceleration.
There haven't been any issues with products where people say, I don't trust that brand anymore.
Yeah.
Or Ram trucks where they say, I don't trust that brand.
So it's definitely like it's a good entry point right now in essence,
I think so.
because you're getting in, you're essentially taking advantage of bad management that led to some just poor decision making, and that's your opportunity to get in from an entry point perspective.
And I think you have to go into the Stellantis network understanding that Stellantis, more than most other brands, has ups and downs. And they have some incredible peaks where their product is really hot and you can make lots of money with Stellantis stores, because remember their margins can be good, the F&I numbers can be really good at a Stellantis store, and the fixed ops are often very good, partly because the vehicle quality is not wonderful, but people really drive these vehicles, so they come in for a lot of repairs and warranty work.
Are there any other non-consensus plays right now in the market, like opportunities?
Well, we have to talk about Nissan, right? And the Nissan is probably the other brand that we've seen cycle up and down quite a lot in the past decades.
They're on the podcast. They're on the podcast this week.
Are they? Okay, so I know that the new management team is trying extremely hard to regain the trust of dealers and consumers by launching more lower priced products, which I think is brilliant, because that's what the market is calling for today, more than super premium products, at least for the mass market brands. So I think they're on track with more lower priced products. They still have to be products that are competitive. Are you going to buy a Rogue or a CRV or a RAV4? The payment has to be such that the customer sees the value. So I think the incentives are coming back as well. And we're cheering for Nissan. A lot of our friends own Nissan dealerships. We want them to be profitable, because if they're profitable, they're valuable. We want them to be valuable so people want to buy them, right? And when they sell them, there'll be a good market for them. So we're cheering for that brand. We hope that they'll find a partner. Maybe they can put their deal back together with Honda. To us, that was a good direction, where they could partner with another well-capitalized, successful automaker that had a powerful brand in the United States. That, to us, maybe 1 + 1 would equal 3 there. So we were a little bit dismayed and disappointed when our understanding is, Nissan walked away. They didn't like the position or the offer, I guess, they were getting from Honda. So we weren't at the table, so we don't know all the reasons, but I think it could be challenging for Nissan to just shrug that off and turn it around quickly. Maybe over the long term, they could get there. But if they could find an operating partner or an investment partner or merger partner that can help them offset some of their high expenses by sharing development costs, just like we think that Hyundai and Kia have been a good marriage. Together they were, or apart, they were kind of weak companies for a long time. Hyundai invested in Kia, I believe, and they're now sharing some platforms. Like if you go to a Hyundai and Kia, vehicles are pretty similar. So they're clearly sharing design and engineering efforts. They market them separately, but there's been an advantage to both companies from combining their back-end functions.
Do you think Nissan has staying power, right? Even if they're able to kind of weather the storm and get out of the slump, do you think this is a brand that can make it? Or, to piggyback off what you just said, is it going to have to find a partner in order to survive?
I think the answer, well, if they don't find a partner, will they survive? They'll have to shrink significantly their cost base, right? And they'll have to find a niche where they can thrive. Maybe it's in that lower priced unit. Maybe they need to be the vehicle of choice for people that are first time buyers or want vehicles that are reliable but don't have as many features as perhaps a Honda or a Toyota would have on it. I'm not an automaker, so I can't recommend any kind of strategy to them. But if you look at, market segmentation, usually there are budget brands and mid brands and high brands. And if you look at the United States today, who's the budget brand? I don't know who that is. The domestics.
And it's also like Mitsubishi. I know it's not talked about that often, but they're not doing too great either on the new side. So it seems like a lot of the budget brands are struggling, or maybe that's just where my focus is. But Nissan, Mitsubishi, what's the through line here?
Well, I think part of it is if you have to invest in the whole electric technology, you have to spend billions of dollars to develop those platforms. It makes it harder to invest in your ICE platforms. You have to just kind of keep whatever you've been selling, you keep making for a while. So it could be that this potential revisions of the CARB requirements will provide some breathing room to companies like Nissan, where they may not go bankrupt because they don't have to have 35% of their production as EVs. They just can't afford to do it. It may be that change gives Nissan in the US some breathing room to continue to sell ICE engines, to find a merger partner, or to buy the technology or lease the technology that they would need to offer in the future for lower emission vehicles, whatever that looks like. So it's a really complex question, Yossi. You're talking about global issues. We haven't even gotten into tariffs yet, about, how the OEMs are going to handle that, how dealers are going to respond to tariffs. So it's complex, but I'm hoping that the new management team at Nissan is successful with their plan. I'm hoping that they emulate some of the good practices from Toyota in particular. I know stair-step programs have always been sort of part of the Nissan culture. I question, and I think other leading dealers question, is that something that's really smart over the long term? Perhaps you have a short-term boost in sales, but if it hurts residual value to customers when they go for the next purchase, if they feel like their Nissan had greater depreciation than a Honda during that time, are they going to come back and buy another Nissan? Those are questions.
Can you explain that for a second? Can you explain how stair-step programs hurt residual values? Pretty much these programs that are, incentivize you to sell, how they're impacting what your vehicle is worth when you end up returning that vehicle to the dealership or selling it.
Well, so as I understand, a typical stair-step program is they would tell the retailer, before the beginning of the month, hey, you have a unit. If you hit, 100 new units, we're going to provide you with an additional incentive of, say, $1,000 per vehicle retro to unit one. If you sell 110, we'll give you $1,500 retro to vehicle one. So let's say you're a store that normally sells 70. So I go, okay, well, I could get an extra $100,000 perhaps if I can hit this bogey. So you're probably going to have to increase advertising or cut prices to get to that extra 30 units a month that you don't normally sell.
Race to the bottom.
Yeah, so at the beginning of the month, you're probably selling close to what pricing you used to. So you might sell the vehicle, let's just say it's a Rogue for $40,000. You might sell it for $40,000. At the end of the month, as you get closer to having to hit that 100 units, you might be selling those Rogues for $37,000. So for the customer that came in at the beginning of the month and bought a car from you at $40,000, at the end of the month, their friend walks in and gets it at $37,000. That customer who spent $40,000 doesn't feel very good. And now, is the resale value for those vehicles going to be set off the 40 or the 37? And if you're sort of flooding the market near the end of the month with a bunch of vehicles, if you're selling a lot of your inventory to rental car companies who are going to keep those cars for 6 months, maybe 18 months on the long end, and then flush those into auction, the residual value of your vehicle is likely to be lower than if you spent $40,000 to buy a vehicle at a franchise that doesn't have stair-step programs, perhaps Toyota. And then so you say, well, if I look at my cost of ownership of that vehicle, it's going to be higher when the depreciation is worse. And customers notice those things, and they tend towards going towards lower total cost of ownership. So those types of practices to us might benefit sales in the short term, but they have an invisible but real negative effect over the medium to long term for those customers and for the dealers and for the OEMs.
Have you sold any Nissan stores recently?
We are selling some now, and we have some that are quite broken where they're losing money, but they're owned by a consolidator who said, I want to sell these 5 franchises, so we're assisting them in the sale of multiple stores.
Oh, wow. So they're selling a bundle.
Yeah. In some cases, people are saying, okay, these don't fit for me anymore. I don't have the management talent to put into these stores. I want to focus on my better assets rather than trying to get a store that's losing $100,000 a month to making $100,000 a month. I'd rather focus on my Mercedes store where maybe I can get it to make another $400,000 a month, which is possible if you have a higher volume Mercedes store. So in some cases, they just want out. And so we're selling businesses like that for some of the larger companies. And we also have some people that are very successful dealers that kind of want to rebalance their portfolio. They want to take some cash out of the Nissan network and put it into either just their pockets or into Honda or Kia or different brands. So, we've got some very good Nissan assets that, today are maybe making a couple $1 million. During the pandemic, they might have been making 6 or 7. And so we're going to find buyers for those assets because just like I mentioned with Stellantis, I think now you could argue is a really good time to buy Nissan if you have confidence that they will survive. Nissan's a little bit of a riskier bet than Stellantis, but I still just don't see the Japanese government letting Nissan go out of business. Just like the U.S. government supported General Motors and Chrysler with loans and other support, I'm pretty confident Japan Inc. is not going to let Nissan go away. That's a very proud national brand for that country. So I don't think they're going away. I think they're going to be there for a long time.
And that's a good thing to take in consideration, right?
Yeah. I mean, the U.S. doesn't have the same level of industrial policy as other countries do, like China, for instance, or Japan or Korea, where they have some real national champions that they want to push nationwide. Our government certainly supports the automakers, but we're not, at the same level as some of these other countries because our economy is more diversified than some of these other countries that depend heavily on auto exports for employment and profitability, which is part of what's driving us towards these tariffs that President Trump has just announced.
This episode is brought to you by Podium. Fast response times aren't just a nice to have, they're your competitive edge. With Podium's AI BDC, dealerships are seeing an 80% increase in after-hours appointments by handling leads 24/7. This conversational AI acts like your best sales rep, booking test drives, answering questions, and connecting with your customers instantly, even on nights and weekends. Plus, AI allows your team to focus on what matters most, closing deals. Don't let leads slip through the cracks. Turn interest into sales day or night with Podium. Learn more by texting CDG to 385-293-3461. That's CDG to 385-293-3461, or click the link in the show notes below.
Let's talk about that. It just feels like every day, there's some global or economic story. It's incredibly difficult to keep up with, right? And I think more importantly from keeping up, just to know what's going to happen. It feels completely unprecedented in our lifetimes, or my lifetime at least. I know there's tariffs and all that, we've done stuff like that in the past. It's been a while, it feels like we're coming out of this lullaby in some sense. But where do you see, give us like the high level overview first of all, right? Tariffs, interest rates do give the Fed some leeway to potentially drop if we head into a steep recession. So there is some breathing room there. It's not like we're at 0% rates anymore like we were, in 2021 or so. And as you think about all that, where do you see just the market, the car market heading for the next year?
So I'm not an economist, but I have gotten to the point where, it used to be I'd wake up in the morning and I'd read the New York Times on my tablet, and then I'd read the Wall Street Journal on paper. Kind of like 1 foot in the old world, 1 foot in the new world, 1 foot liberal, 1 foot conservative, because I figure that's maybe the way to have a balanced outlook on what's happening in our world. And I would say over the last, leading up to the election and since then, I'm waking up regularly at 2 or 3 in the morning and opening up my tablet to first read the New York Times to see what happened yesterday, what were the executive orders, what's the reaction, et cetera. And then reading the Wall Street Journal, which, is being worked on overnight and then sent to my driveway. And I'm doing that. I'm waking up more often now because there's more change. So you kind of have to be prepared and understanding how to react to it. And I was expecting after the election, I think like many people, that we would have an administration that was a little bit more friendly to business people. And, perhaps that would mean higher economic growth than what we've had in recent years, which has been pretty good. Like our economy has been the envy of the world in many ways, you could say. During the Biden administration, we had, certainly the second half, we had 3% plus GDP growth. We had declining inflation. It was down about 3%. We had low unemployment. It was about 4%. Like those are all pretty good figures. I think we'd take those every year if we could get them. And then after the election, there was this excitement, I think, from many business people and investors in the auto stocks, retailers and manufacturers. I mean, the stocks went up, and auto stocks went up more than the S&P went up. People were excited about the potential impact of auto retail, perhaps because of the lessening or more realistic goals on emissions, that we could be able to sell cars to people who wanted to buy them. So there was a lot of excitement. I think people were happy, and we were doing these polls, and I'll give you a couple of polls here. Right after the election, we did a poll in January, and this was a LinkedIn poll. You'll see, I think maybe you've done some of this too, I don't know. But during that time, we asked people, hey, do you think profits in 2025 will be higher than, the same as, or less than 2024? And in that poll, 44% said that profits would be higher, okay? 16% said lower, and 40% said the same. Now, 2 weeks ago, I asked the same question to some people. There's about 150 people on a webinar I was doing, and the response I got was flipped. It went from 44% saying it was going to be higher to only 16%. And worse, went from 16% to 42%. So people now it was different people, right? But it was at a different time. And it seems like people just walked from one part of the pie chart to the other. I've got the data here.
Wow.
I've got to show it to you. But okay, so what happened? Is it just different people, different perspectives? But these people were not alone. Like, we tracked the stock prices of the publicly traded retailers and the S&P 500. I asked my team to put it for me today, and I don't know if you can see it on this podcast.
I see.
But
what is that? Yeah.
This is the blue is the publicly traded auto retailers, and the red is the S&P 500. And
so have we reverted to the mean? Is that what I'm seeing here?
What we've seen is that there was sort of peak stock prices for the S&P and auto retailers back at the beginning of February. So a month after the election, a lot of excitement, I think. And then we're down now 13% from that high for the publicly traded auto retailers, including a lot of that is today, when the announcement of these tariffs on Mexico and China are going into effect. And now the concern is that the price of these vehicles that we're selling is going to have to go up. And that's the one battle that we've been fighting to overcome, is improving the affordability of the vehicles that are on dealers' lots today. The price went up a lot. It went up higher than people's incomes. So the number of weeks you had to work to afford to buy a vehicle, it went up by like 5 or 6 weeks during the pandemic time. It was coming back down, but still higher than it used to be. And now the cost of these tariffs is likely going to be, or the impact of these tariffs is likely going to be, that cars are going to become less affordable, which means lower sales and lower profits for everyone in our industry. And that's why the stock prices are going down today.
When you say less affordable, I think lots of people that I spoke with were for months said it's never going to happen. Tariffs were a negotiating tool. It's never going to happen. Never going to have to bluff. Now they're obviously happening, and tomorrow it could change. In 3 days it could change again. I don't want to focus on the micro in the sense of the daily movements. I think let's just think more big picture. How do you see this impacting the industry over like a span of 12 months? Can consumers absorb any more price increases in any format? Or is this 100% margin compression? Or is it the classic kind of economic perspective, which of course I'm not an economist either, but I've read enough online by this point, which is that, quantity demanded will come down, the prices will stay more or less the same for the consumer, or maybe, will go up, but just fewer people will actually buy vehicles. What do you think, how does it shake out?
So what you said is what I learned in my economics 101 class, which is if you have a certain level of supply and you have certain level of price, there's going to be, a point where those two cross, and that's going to be the level of demand and the price at which somebody will pay for that item. Now, we just increased the price that's going to be the likely outcome of these tariffs, you just reduce the demand for it. So we're
Correct.
going to be
Yes.
producing and selling fewer cars in this country, because even the vehicles that are produced in the U.S. have a lot of content that was produced in Japan or Canada or Mexico or Korea or Germany or wherever. There's a lot of stuff coming in that is now going to get tariffed to go into a vehicle that's assembled in the U.S. So in theory, we should have less demand in the short term. Now, I think President Trump is doing this for a number of reasons. In the short term, we're going to have the negative impact. The hope is that these tariffs will cause these other countries to make trade more fair so that other U.S. industries can export more to those countries. And if they're exporting more to those countries, it grows our overall economy. I think President Trump also wants there to be more manufacturing inside the United States. I read, or at least I heard from one of my teammates today, that Honda has announced they're going to start producing the Civic in Indiana.
Correct.
Okay, bingo. So that's what he wants. He wants more production in the U.S. And if that happens, it should improve our economy. But that could take 6 months, a year. I don't even know how long it's going to take to increase that production.
So there could be some pain in between, which would adversely impact dealership profits. And I think I can't see a world where quantity demanded by consumers just goes down due to prices, but that automakers don't also increase incentives or do something in order to make up some volume, which will end up compressing margins there as well. So either way, it feels like it's going to just be a tougher period for the next 6 to 12 months, which, will obviously, in all, again, it's so hard to predict this stuff, but it seems like we're just going to have some lower profits potentially.
There's another factor out there too, which is pent-up demand. And if you look at the number of units that we were selling in this country for 5 or so years before the pandemic, it was about 17 million new units per year. Some of that was going into fleet, the rest was going into retail. And you could argue that the manufacturers were maybe overproducing a little bit because the margins of some brands were quite low at that time.
Yeah.
But then the pandemic hit and production plummeted, and we lost millions and millions. By our estimates, probably over 10 million units that weren't produced, that we estimate would have been produced had there not been a pandemic. 2020, 21, 22, 23, 24, we lost a lot of production. And so we've been sort of assuming that we would sort of have this boom period, post-pandemic, where all this production would come back online and those cars would be sold at dealerships, and it would be this really fun period for all of us. That hasn't happened, and it hasn't happened because the price per vehicle is way higher than it used to be. So the demand, we talked about that when the price goes up, it doesn't mean necessarily that the sales will continue. So, but nevertheless, those people that didn't buy a vehicle in 2020 or 21, 22, 23, 24, their vehicles are not staying the same age. They're continuing to get older. And at some point, those people have to come back to the market and replace those vehicles because they're getting crashed or they're becoming obsolete or the cost of the repairs exceeds their value. So there's that element too that we've been waiting to show up. So maybe raising prices won't matter that much to the U.S. consumer. They just have to buy these vehicles to replace the ones that they own. I'm a good example of that. I had a car that was in an accident, totaled. I went to go buy a new one. They told me it's going to be 6 months or whatever to buy and get in line. So I just figured I'd wait. And then I just took possession of a vehicle in December. So I waited almost a year before I went back into the market. So I think it is one thing I've learned, the pandemic really taught me, is it is darn hard to predict the future and almost worthless to try. Now, automakers have to try to predict demand because they have to order supplies and they have to have labor. Auto retailers have got the good fortune where they certainly have to order cars in anticipation of selling them over the next 90 days, but they don't have to order cars in anticipate selling over the next year. Which is one reason why the auto retail model is so much more reliably profitable.
That's a great point.
Than automakers. Because you can adjust so much faster and your costs are so much less fixed than automakers. But nevertheless, as this chart shows, the automaker or the auto retailers' prices have declined a lot faster today than the S&P 500 has because auto retailers are more impacted by tariffs than the average company is.
So I think that's a great segue to something I wanted to talk about, which is the auto retailers and demand for 33 rooftop dealer groups because our boy Herb Chambers sold to Asbury. Talk of the town. Oh man, the rumors were circulating for months, right? And they just denied it and denied it and denied it. But it's true. And it happened. Herb Chambers sold to Asbury, or the deal I believe it's in the process of closing right now. But massive deal, $1.34 billion. How did you react when you heard about this? And I have to imagine that you've known about it also for at least a month and a half.
I think that this is something that Herb has been considering for years and years. years, and I've met Herb, friendly with him. I'm not close. We represented one of his close friends that had some dealerships in Connecticut nearby where Herb lives, and I believe that Herb would say it too, is that he'd been considering this for years and had gone down the path with other parties pretty far before reconsidering. And I think Herb's decision making is likely similar to many other dealers when they're getting near retirement age, which is I really enjoy this business. It's been incredibly lucrative. It's provided great opportunities for me and my family. It's allowed me to give back significantly to my communities. And I don't know if your audience knows, but I think Herb announced, or the hospital announced, a $100 million gift that Herb made personally to a hospital system there in Massachusetts. How many people can give away $100 million at one time? And I'm sure Herb's been giving away a lot of money for decades. But at some point, it makes sense for everyone to consider, what are you going to do with this wealth? Do you want to control the wealth before you become incapacitated? And now I believe Herb will have great fun and be able to very wisely handle his money. He will likely be giving more of it away, be my assumption. He certainly has a lot of it. He had a lot before, but now he's got another, $1 billion plus, probably even after taxes to give away. So I think I understand the reason for the sale. Age catches up with all of us, and Herb's still a very vibrant guy and has a chance to have fun. He kept one of his best stores, the Mercedes store there in the Boston area. So he's not done.
Yeah. Why do you think he kept that? Just to just have some fun going,
if you
stroll the lot a little bit.
We see this. If you've been a dealer for decades, it's in your blood.
It's hard to leave.
You bleed gasoline, right? It's very hard for people to leave. And some of the clients we represented who exited because they wanted to retire have come back in, either as owners or investors in the business. So that may have been the reason that he wanted to keep a toe in the water. A pulse on the business.
Yeah,
he doesn't have to pay for his vehicles. He continues to get demos and free gas and health insurance. And all kinds of reasons why people want to keep their stores. And I understand the rationale for the purchase. Asbury has been aggressive on a number of transactions over the years. There was the Coons transaction. There was a couple of big transactions in Texas as Park Place, I believe it was. So Dave Holt has been quite a good suitor to some of the larger dealership owners over time, and I know he is a great deal of integrity and patience, which is what it takes to build trust with a potential seller. For almost all of our clients, their businesses are their legacies. They poured their hearts and souls into these businesses. They've literally given it their all in terms of energies, their hours, their thoughts. And if they are going to sell, many of them care quite a lot about who the buyer is going to be, how that buyer will treat their employees, how they will treat the local charities that dealer has been supporting over the years. So a lot of things come into play. But Asbury, of course, has a vested interest too. They're not just giving money away. They want to get a higher return on investment for their shareholders. They could have used that capital to buy back their stock. They could have used that capital to buy dealerships in different markets. But I think that Dave Holt, who grew up in the Northeast, kind of in the Boston area, I think he knows how wealthy that market is, how vibrant it is economically, and this acquisition provides a large platform immediately for Asbury to have a dominant role in New England. And we have a summer home in Massachusetts, so I know we're very close to a lot of these stores that Herb owns. People complain about the Boston traffic. It's almost as bad as LA traffic. But if you're an auto dealer, there's really not many more good feelings you can have than looking out your window and seeing a traffic jam outside because there's so many cars right in front of you. So I think it's a really good purchase, and I believe that Dave Holt and Asbury have been focused on this opportunity for years and years. So I'm happy for them that their persistence paid off.
This episode is brought to you by CDG Recruiting. The Car Dealership Guy platform has direct access to thousands of skilled professionals in the dealership and automotive industries. And so, building on top of our free industry job board, we've launched CDG Recruiting, a hands-on white glove automotive recruiting service. Whether you're looking to fill roles in dealership management, the C-suite, F&I, fixed ops, auto tech, or SaaS, we take the hassle out of hiring by doing the heavy lifting for you. It's easy. Start by submitting a confidential talent request on our website. Next, we connect you with a dedicated talent expert who will thoroughly understand your unique needs. And finally, we present you with top-notch candidates who are ready to drive your business forward. And here's the best part. We vet and screen every candidate for you so you don't have to. And with our placement guarantee, hiring through CDG Recruiting is 100% worry-free. Collectively, our team has decades of experience and has successfully placed over 1,000 roles in the automotive industry, so you know you're in good hands. If you're ready to find your next rockstar employee, try CDG Recruiting today by visiting cdgrecruiting.com or clicking the link in the show notes below. Again, that's cdgrecruiting.com.
So question on, you mentioned at a deal of this scale at that level and the relationship there between, the CEOs or founder and CEO, do you think that Herb maximized the deal? Not, by the way, not implying that that is the only consideration for him in a deal. Obviously, he wants to bring on the right type of leadership that will make this business last for decades to come. But do you think that, could he have maximized the deal we don't know how many parties were involved. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think when you look at a large group of stores, well, owners have different objectives. And when we're hired, we always ask, what is your objective here? If it's to maximize value, then, and that's our tagline, maximizing value for dealers, we got it trademarked. If it's to maximize value, then we should go out to a lot of parties and grind, because we're going to be certain to surface the best buyer, the most motivated buyer for your business. If I'm talking to a lot of parties, then I have a hard time keeping the process confidential, right? And if I'm going to grind, it could take quite a while. It could take years to get to the finish line. So for some dealers, that's what their objective is. They don't care about if anybody finds out. They really want to get that last nickel, or in Herb's case, last millions of dollars. Other people have different objectives, and they think, what's most important to me is that I can sort of choose the buyer that I like, the one who I think will be most similar to me, have the same culture. And if I give up a few dollars or a few millions of dollars, that's okay if I feel like my people are going to land in a good home. So then it's a different story. Then we're going, okay, well, then we need to identify the buyer that has
the right buyers.
Culture. Yes. So there's different objectives that our clients have, and then we solve for them. So you want to maximize price, we go to a lot of people. If you want to have a confidential process, sometimes we just go to the one buyer that we think would be most motivated and offer that business to him or her. And if they make an attractive offer, we accept it, and we don't ever call a second party. Now that's maybe 10% of our engagements are that way, probably less. Most people want to get a lot of value for their business, so they want there to be multiple parties in the mix and hopefully create some competition between those buyers to surface the one who truly is most motivated. I would say for a large group, there is often an area where they might not maximize the value if they're just choosing one buyer. And I would say, this isn't Herb's business, but let's say you had another dealership group that had 20 stores. I would bet that in almost every case, the bottom 10% of those stores are making no money or maybe losing money. So not producing any profit to the overall enterprise. In fact, maybe they're causing some losses. But if you roll those losing stores in with the rest of the stores, and a buyer saying, okay, well, you're making $150 million, I'm going to pay you $750 million in goodwill. If you could take those bottom stores out of the mix and sell them separately to somebody who understands that they're perhaps a little broken and they can fix them, you'll get positive blue sky value for the stores that are broken, as opposed to what happening creating negative blue sky
I like
value.
that. There's some arbitrage there.
Yeah, so that's the area where if you're selling a large group and you're selling it to just a one party, you really got to make sure that that party is not getting those stores for not only free, but you're essentially paying them to take those stores because you're getting value from the rest of your enterprise. So that's an area where I believe our firm has got a lot of expertise. We know what good stores are worth, but since we're doing these divestitures, we also know what people will pay for stores that are break even or losing money. It's almost always a positive value. And for instance, we were representing the owner of a Nissan dealership in Texas in a great market, and they were losing $2-3 million a year, and we got an offer for $8 million in blue sky. And I think the largest companies, and I think Herb had some really big, nice stores, but I believe he also had some smaller stores. And it may be smaller stores are not always a great fit for public companies. I think the public companies do really well with big stores, high volume stores, luxury stores. I think they're very good at operating those businesses. Smaller stores often require a little bit more of an entrepreneurial local flavor to perform well. And so that's another reason why, sometimes I would guess these largest buyers, if you said, hey, we're going to take these 5 stores that are break even or losing money, we're going to sell them separately. I don't think that impacts the value negatively to those big buyers. They might even feel more confident, pay more for the remaining stores. So that's what we've seen sometimes in these bigger transactions, is that often there may be a little bit of value lost to the sellers if they didn't consider moving the bottom part of their portfolio off to a different buyer or set of buyers that would be willing to pay real blue sky for stores that are not performing very well.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Wow. Any closing thoughts? What's in your mind? Taking a step back from all this now, how do you feel nowadays with all the change, and how do you feel personally?
Personally, I think, there was a saying thousands of years by the Romans, may you live in interesting times. So I believe in that. I believe that change creates opportunities for all of us, and not all change is going to be positive. And I think we're experiencing that now, where we do have an administration that cares about business owners and wants them to to succeed, without feeling guilty that they're doing something wrong. We have an administration that wants to make it in some ways easier on consumers and auto dealers and automakers by having realistic emissions targets. That I think is extremely positive for dealers in the CARB states. It was almost, I don't want to say existential to them, but very important that there's some relief that happens there soon. The tariffs in the short term are obviously thought of as negative by investors, and I'm afraid consumers will also not love them when they see the impact. And of course, one thing that President Trump ran on was reducing inflation, and this is inflationary. I saw a little interview with Stephen Cohen, who's a very famous investor, hedge fund guy. He said what he's seeing now out of the administration is, the layoffs at the government is a form of austerity. You're cutting government spending. Those people, they have jobs, they have incomes, they're buying cars, they're buying houses and products, and you just cut their income. Now, maybe they'll find jobs in different parts of the economy where they'll be more productive as opposed to in government. That's the hope. But nevertheless, you're probably pulling some consumers out of the market when you're terminating their employment. And then the tariffs are inflationary, right? You're raising the price of goods. And by his estimate, that was going to take 1 point off GDP in 2025. So if we're going to do 3, now he thinks we're going to do 2, or roughly in those numbers. So that part is concerning. If the objective of the tariffs is achieved, where there's more manufacturing in this country or lower tariffs from our trade partners, which allows us to produce more and export more, that's why he's doing it. I don't think he wants to punish the U.S. consumer. Hopefully that happens in the next 6 months, not 6 years. Because if we just have suffering for years and no benefit, then obviously we've lost as an economy and as a society.
Mm-hmm.
But for us,
you just as you mentioned that, I just have to imagine that could become a tricky time to be a DC-based dealer over the next year or so. Think about that.
It's a really good question, Yossi, because for decades, one of the selling points when we were working with dealers in the Mid-Atlantic area, the DC area, was
stability.
You kind of have a recession-proof economy. The government has been growing nonstop. I don't know what the period was, and not just U.S. government employees.
That's incredible.
The private sector that serves the U.S. government, because I think the number of employees of the U.S. government has been pretty stable for a while, but the private sector has grown tremendously. And so if those folks have lost their jobs, they need to find new employment. Maybe they go back to the states where they were before, where cost of living is lower, and maybe there are more opportunities for them. What will happen to sales in the D.C. region? You might have their recession now. This could be what's going on. So we'll see. Again, you have a lot of growth in areas like Texas, Carolinas, and Florida, but we might have some little mini recessions in places like D.C. that will complicate the lives of retailers in that area for sure.
Well said. Alan Haig, is it too early to say happy birthday? I have a little note over here that says that you're turning the big 60.
Yeah.
How does
St. Patrick's Day?
Okay.
It's coming up. I try to offset my aging body by sometimes running races. I was joking. I ran in a half marathon on Miami Beach last weekend, and I joke, I can tell I'm getting older because my times are getting slower. But the age of the other runners, it never seems to go up. They always seem to be 25 and 40 years old. I seem to be getting slower and slower. But
Alan, give us one nugget of wisdom. Give us one nugget of wisdom. It doesn't have to be about the car business, just anything, life. What you got for us?
I think the fun part about life is continuing to learn new things. When I was younger, I thought I knew a lot and smart, but the older you get, the more you realize you don't know. And I think the more you realize you're capable of self-improvement or helping those around you. And that's something that I get joy out of, realizing, how I could be maybe a better person, a better advisor, better father, better husband, better friend. So for me, that's the joy for me is really trying to get better as an individual. I'm not yet given up trying to get better as a runner. I read online that you lose about 1 to 1.5% of your performance every year as you age. And I went back and I looked. I did the same race 8 years ago, and it was about 1.5% a year faster when I did the math. But one of my sons is big into health, and he's given me this book about diet and how.
Which one? Which book is it?
The 4-Hour Body, which has been around for a long time.
I haven't heard of that.
And it's a lot. You don't have to work out that hard, and you don't have to, starve yourself. Just change what you eat and how you exercise, and you'll perform better. So that's an example of how I'm trying to learn and never be. Maybe I won't decline as fast in the future as I have in the past.
Touché. Alan Haig, always a pleasure. Thanks for coming on the pod. Really enjoyed it.
Good to be with you, Yossi.
All right. Hope you enjoyed that episode. Please give the podcast a rating, consider subscribing to the show, and check the show notes for links to what we talked about. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you guys next time.